The day I found out my grandmother had left me everything, I cried in the parking lot of the attorney's office for 20 minutes before I could even start my car, not because I was sad, because I was relieved in a way that scared me. Because for the first time in 6 years, I felt like I had ground under my feet again. I sat there with the documents in my lap, the will, the asset summary, the estate valuation, and I kept reading the same line over and over. Sole beneficiary, my granddaughter, Lily Ann Mercer. My grandmother's handwriting was in the margin. She'd annotated her own will. It said, in her loopy cursive, she'll know what to do with it. I wiped my face, took a breath, and drove home. My husband was standing on the front porch when I pulled in, so was his sister. That alone should have told me something. My sister-in-law never came over on a Tuesday afternoon. She had a nail appointment every Tuesday. She'd missed her own cousin's wedding shower for a nail appointment. But there she was, arms folded, standing half a step behind my husband like she was there for moral support. Or as a witness. My husband, I'll call him what he was by the end of that day, which is someone I no longer recognized, held out a manila envelope before I even reached the porch steps. "We need to talk," he said. I looked at the envelope, I looked at his face. He wasn't nervous, that was the thing that hit me first. He wasn't nervous at all. I took the envelope. Inside was a letter from an attorney I'd never heard of, a document with both our names on it, and a single sheet of paper in my husband's handwriting that listed, and I mean listed, like a grocery list, the reasons our marriage was over. 6 years reduced to bullet points. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," he said. "The house is in my name, you know that. My sister is going to help me with the transition. You have until the end of the month." His sister nodded like she was confirming a business arrangement. I stood on my own front porch, the porch I had painted with my own hands the summer we moved in, the porch where I'd strung lights 2 Christmases in a row because he kept saying he'd get to it, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, not grief, something quieter than that. I looked at my husband. I looked at his sister, and I smiled. "What is that?" my sister-in-law said, narrowing her eyes. "Why are you smiling?" I tucked the envelope under my arm. "I'll be in touch," I said and walked inside. Here's what they didn't know. Here's what nobody knew, because I hadn't told a single person. 2 weeks earlier, I had been sitting across from a forensic accountant named Mr. Daly in a gray office building on the east side of town. He had a printout on the desk between us. He'd spent 4 months going through financial records I'd handed him piece by piece. Bank statements, wire transfers, business filings, insurance claims. He'd gone through all of it with the kind of patience that only people who genuinely love numbers can sustain. He slid the printout toward me. "Your husband has been systematically moving money out of your joint accounts for approximately 3 years," he said, "into a holding LLC registered in his sister's name. The LLC has made several significant asset purchases, including, as of 8 months ago, a partial stake in a commercial property in Nashville." I looked at the numbers. "He used your signature on 2 of the wire authorization forms," Mr. Daly said. "Those signatures are not yours." I already knew that. But hearing someone else say it, someone with credentials, someone whose report would hold up in court, made it. "How much total?" I asked. He pointed to the bottom line. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, "what do I do next?" He handed me another card. "You call this person." The card said, "Investigative Financial Forensics, Federal Referral Division." Let me back up, because none of this started with spreadsheets. It started with a receipt. 3 years ago, I found a hotel receipt in the pocket of my husband's jacket while I was taking it to the dry cleaner. 2 nights at a hotel in Charlotte, the same weekend he'd told me he was at a conference in Atlanta. I didn't confront him. I know that sounds strange. People always ask why I didn't say something right away. But I'd been married to this man for 3 years at that point. I knew how he operated. If I confronted him without anything solid, he'd deny it, he'd flip it around, and I'd end up apologizing for going through his pockets. So instead, I got quiet, and I started paying attention. I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. How his phone was always face down, how he took calls in the garage, how his sister, who had never liked me, who had told him at our rehearsal dinner, loudly enough for 3 tables to hear, that he could do better, had suddenly become his closest confidant. They were always texting, always on the same side of every conversation. I started keeping notes. Just a document on my laptop, password protected, tucked inside a folder labeled Old Tax Files. I wrote down dates, times, things I noticed, nothing dramatic, just facts. And then, about a year after the receipt, I found the first transfer. I only found it because I happened to be logged into our joint checking account to pay a utility bill, and I saw a withdrawal I didn't recognize, $8,000. The memo line said consulting fee. My husband didn't have any consulting arrangement that I knew of. I took a screenshot. Over the next 6 months, I found 11 more. By then, I knew I needed help. Not just a divorce attorney. Though I had one of those too, a woman who came recommended by my grandmother's estate lawyer, who was sharp and had a way of making you feel like everything was already being handled. I needed someone who understood money the way my husband and his sister understood money. That was when I found Mr. Daly, and while Mr. Daly spent 4 months building a financial map of everything my husband had moved, I did something else. I reached out to a woman named Elise. I'd never met Elise in person. I found her through an online support community for women dealing with financial abuse in marriage. She'd posted once, briefly, about her experience. Her ex-husband had done something similar, hidden assets in a business entity registered to a family member. Her case had gone federal, she'd won. She messaged me back within an hour of my reaching out. Document everything, she wrote. Don't let him know you know, and find out if there are other victims. I didn't know what she meant by that last part. Not then. The day after my husband handed me the divorce papers on the porch, I called my attorney. He served me, I said. He thinks the house is his, it's in his name, she said. He's right about that. But the house isn't the issue. The house is the smallest piece of this. I know. Are you ready to move? Yes, I said. I'm ready. She filed the following week. Not just a divorce petition. A civil fraud complaint naming my husband and his sister jointly. Wire fraud, forgery, fraudulent conveyance of marital assets. My husband called me that afternoon, and for the first time in 6 years his voice had a different quality to it. Something tighter. Like he was trying to sound calm and it wasn't quite working. What is this, he said. It wasn't a question. It's a legal filing, I said. My attorney can explain it. You don't have grounds for this. We had a joint account. I had access to those funds. You forged my signature on federal wire transfer forms, I said. That's a different thing, silence. And the LLC in your sister's name, I added. The one that bought a commercial property in Nashville. Mr. Daly has a very detailed report about that. More silence. And then, I want to talk. In person. Anything you want to say to me can go through my attorney, I said, and I ended the call. Here's the thing about my sister-in-law that I hadn't understood until Elise told me to look for other victims. She wasn't just helping my husband hide money. She had done this before. Her first husband, they'd divorced about 4 years before my husband and I got married, had filed a civil suit against her. I found the court record. He'd alleged that she'd moved significant assets into a third-party account during their marriage, and that the funds had been used to purchase property in her own name. The case had settled. He'd gotten something, but not everything, because he hadn't had a forensic accountant. He hadn't known what he was looking for. When I brought this to my attorney, she went very still. This changes the pattern, she said. I know. This suggests a deliberate scheme. Not just opportunism, a scheme she's used more than once. Yes. She made a note. I'm going to make a call, she said. She picked up her phone, hesitated, and looked at me. This might get bigger than a civil matter. I know, I said. Make the call. The next few months were not clean or easy or triumphant in any way that felt satisfying in the moment. There was nothing cinematic about it. It was paperwork and waiting and more paperwork. It was a deposition where my husband's attorney tried to suggest that I had authorized the transfers and that my memory was faulty. It was sitting across a conference room table from my husband, the man I'd made Sunday pancakes with, the man I'd driven to the ER at 2 in the morning when he thought he was having a heart attack, and watching him look at me like I was someone he had never met. It was learning that my sister-in-law had also been involved in a predatory lending scheme that had defrauded 4 elderly investors, 2 of them retired teachers from Knoxville, out of money they'd pooled together to fund what they thought was a legitimate real estate partnership. The commercial property in Nashville, the one bought with money transferred out of my accounts, was the same property that had been sold to those investors under false pretenses. When the federal investigation expanded to include the investment fraud, my sister-in-law hired a criminal defense attorney. My husband hired a different criminal defense attorney. They stopped speaking to each other. My grandmother's estate settled during all of this. I hadn't told my husband about it before he served me the divorce papers, because I hadn't had the chance. He'd been waiting on the porch when I got home, papers already in hand. And later, in the deposition, his attorney tried to argue that I had hidden the inheritance from my husband and that this constituted a marital asset subject to division. My attorney looked up from her notes with an expression I can only describe as serene. My client was served with divorce papers, she said, approximately 4 hours after the will was read. She had not yet spoken to her husband. She had not yet spoken to anyone. The timeline is documented. The inheritance was mine. Every cent. And because the divorce had been initiated, because the petition had been filed and the date was established, the inheritance fell entirely outside the marital estate. My husband had handed me the papers too soon. By about 4 hours, his sister had told him to move fast. To get the paperwork in before I could get my bearings. She had rushed him, and in rushing him, she had made the one mistake that cost them everything they had hoped to gain. The civil judgment came first. My husband and his sister were ordered to repay the funds transferred out of my accounts with interest. The LLC was dissolved. The Nashville property was subject to a lien pending the federal investigation. The federal case, the investment fraud, took longer. I was not the plaintiff in that case, I was a witness. I sat in a federal courthouse in downtown Nashville and I answered questions for 2 days, and then I went home and I waited. The retired teachers from Knoxville, I thought about them a lot during those months. One of them had put in her late husband's life insurance settlement. The other had been saving for 20 years. They hadn't come forward at first because they were embarrassed. Because they'd trusted someone, and being deceived by someone you trust has a particular kind of shame attached to it that has nothing to do with fault. I wrote them each a letter, not about the case, just to say that I saw what had happened to them, that it wasn't their fault, that I hoped things got better. One of them wrote back. She had a granddaughter about my age, she said. She was glad someone had kept pulling on the thread. The divorce was finalized 11 months after my husband handed me that envelope on the porch. The house sold. His name had been on it, but the court had determined that marital funds had been used for the down payment, funds that included my income from the first 2 years of our marriage, and so the equity was split. It wasn't a victory, it was an accounting. I moved into a rental on the other side of the city. Second floor, east-facing windows, good light in the mornings. I bought a coffee maker I'd been wanting for years and had never bought because my husband didn't like the counter clutter. I put it on the counter and I left it there. I went back to a job I'd stepped back from during the marriage. Consulting work I'd done before, project-based, the kind of work I was good at and had quietly let atrophy because it was easier not to compete, not to take up too much space. I was good at it. I'd always been good at it. I'd just stopped believing that. My grandmother had known, I think. She was perceptive in the way that very old women who have survived a lot tend to be. She used to watch me during family dinners, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Like she was doing the math on something. She'll know what to do with it. She was right. People ask me sometimes, women in the support community, women who reach out after seeing other people's stories, they ask me how I kept it together, how I stayed quiet for so long without breaking. And honestly, the answer is that I wasn't staying quiet. I was building something. Every document I saved, every note I took, every question I asked Mr. Daly, I wasn't being patient, I was laying brick. There's a difference between suffering in silence and working in silence. I spent a long time confusing those two, sissies. A lot of women do. We're told to be patient, to give it time, to not be dramatic. And sometimes that internalized voice, be patient, don't make a scene, is actually a survival mechanism turned against you. It keeps you quiet when what you should be doing is documenting. The only thing I'd do differently, if I could go back, I would have started sooner. The first time I felt something was wrong, not the receipt, even earlier than that, I would have started keeping notes. Because the notes were what saved me. My sister-in-law pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud as part of a federal plea agreement. She was sentenced to 30 months and ordered to pay restitution to the 4 investors. My husband pleaded to 1 count of fraudulent misrepresentation. He received probation and a fine. I wasn't in the courtroom for either of those. I'd given my testimony. My part was done. I found out from my attorney, who called me on a Wednesday morning while I was drinking coffee by my east-facing windows. "It's over," she said. I put my mug down. Outside, a neighbor was walking a dog I'd never seen before. A large, brown, extremely earnest-looking dog who was very interested in something in the grass. Normal morning, normal world. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "Thank your grandmother," she said. "If you hadn't had the resources to pursue this properly, it would have gone a different way." She was right. And that sat with me for a long time, because I knew most women didn't have that. Most women didn't have an inheritance land at exactly the right moment, didn't have a connection to a forensic accountant, didn't have 6 months of runway to build a case before they had to move. The women in Knoxville certainly hadn't. That's the part that doesn't make for a clean ending. The part where I won, mostly, but only partly because I was smart, and partly because I got lucky in ways other people don't get to be lucky. I think about that. I keep the support community active. I try to be the person that Elise was for me. I answer messages when I can. I pass along the names of attorneys and accountants, and I tell women again and again, document everything. Start before you think you need to. The notes are what will save you. My grandmother's estate ultimately gave me options. It let fight. It let me survive the 11 months of legal limbo without flinching every time a bill came in. It let me start over in a second-floor apartment with good morning light and a coffee maker on the counter. I don't take that for granted. Not for a single day. But I'll tell you what I've earned entirely on my own, with no inheritance and no luck involved. I earned knowing that I paid attention, that when something felt wrong, I didn't look away, that I sat in a gray office with a man who loved spreadsheets, and I learned what my own financial life actually looked like, and I didn't flinch at any of it. I earned knowing I kept pulling on the thread. That part is mine, completely and entirely mine. And it's the part I'd carry with me, even if everything else had gone differently.